One of the most powerful trip mechanisms in my life is the life decades exercise. Bob Buford sat me down and said, Lloyd, I want you to work on an exercise with me that'll give you trajectory for your life. It'll help you think long term, and it will create a mechanism for you to reinvent yourself systematically and regularly. And he said, I want you to make a list on starting with the decade you're in right now, and describe that decade in one or two words. And then go to the decade before and all the way down to your teen years. Describe each decade with one or two words. What was the core thing happening? What was the focus of that decade? And then off to the right, just jot down how you roughly spent your time. So I did that. It was pretty straightforward, but quite telling. He said, now the power of this exercise is to go forward. He said, when you go forward decade by decade and you put one or two words to describe that decade, all of a sudden it gives you clarity. Where are you going? It's like when you're hiking in the woods and you're looking ahead and you can't quite find the trail. You look back at the blazes on the trees behind you and all of a sudden you can see where the trail's going. This exercise helps you think ahead. And because it was so long ago, I've now gone through 3 different decades in my life using the power of the life decades exercise. Because I want to finish well. I don't just want to start well. I want to finish well. I want to be persistent. I want to stay in the game. Your kingdom impact compounds over time. And I know that the biggest return on life is going to happen towards the end of my life. And so it's building on everything I've been doing so far. I don't want to squander the rest of my life. So here's how I encourage you to do this. Take a sheet of paper or however you capture notes and start with the current decade of your life. If you're in your 30s, what 1 or 2 words describe this decade in your life? And then move back to your 20s and your teen years. And then think ahead. What would you like your 40s to be characterized by? What would you like your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s? You're probably going to live, because of longevity medicine, you're probably going to live into your 90s, maybe beyond 100 years old. So think about those. And for me, it's provided a trip mechanism that when I turned 50, I needed to reinvent myself. And I was able to tell my team in my 49th year, next year, I'm going to change how I allocate my time. I'm going to change the focus of my life. And the same thing happened when I turned 60. And so from 35 to 63, it's provided a trip mechanism. A trip mechanism forces you to stop, think, redirect. And that's what it's done for me. It's under this guise of wanting to finish well, of persistence. And, when we were working on this idea of finishing great, we did events with Jim Collins in Boulder, Colorado, where he lives. And we would get 75 or 100 leaders together. And we worked on a simple topic. What would it be like for you to finish well? Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and Built to Last, was interested in this topic because he noticed that many of the level 5 leaders that he studied in Good to Great and Built to Last didn't finish well when they left corporate America. And he wondered why that was. And so we would get leaders together in the summer, one summer after another, and we would only focus on questions. What does it take to finish well? In preparation for that, I got out all the files of people I'd coached 15 or 20 years before, and I asked myself who's finishing well and who's not, and what made the difference. And when I listened to them and I looked deep into their lives, I discovered some really important things. That the things I thought would be big factors in finishing well really weren't. That I thought talent and money would be big factors. I thought if you had more talent, that you would be more likely to finish well. If you had more resources, you would be more likely to finish well. But it turns out that if you have more talent, more resources, you're no more or less likely to finish well. The big factors were, number one, do you know your calling? That is the keel in your boat, that when the wind of life blows across your deck, you don't drift. It pushes you forward. Do you know your calling, and has it been affirmed in your life? The second big factor was surrounding yourself with sources of encouragement. When you're living out your calling, there will be times of discouragement. It's just a question of when. And so how can you and I surround ourselves with sources of encouragement so that we can persist? For me, a personal board of directors is one of those sources of encouragement. Having some people around me that I meet with regularly, and I've asked, would you please come alongside me, bring perspective, help me avoid temptation, help me stay in the game when I feel discouraged, encourage me, and we'll do that for each other. I keep the book of days. I keep an artifact of where I see God at work each day. It's a way of encouraging me. Surround yourself with sources of encouragement. And then work on adaptability. You know, when people get older, it's common to become stuck in your ways and, quote, grumpy old men. What's happening there? Well, you become less flexible. You know, there's a section in the Bible that talks about the potter's field. The potter's field was where they threw the clay that was no longer flexible. And I don't ever want to become the clay that the Lord can't continually mold. I want to be flexible. The Life Decades exercise forces me to be flexible, forces me to reinvent myself. Having clarity around my calling keeps me in the game. Being surrounded by encouragement brings the wind at my back that is so needed. And then being agile and flexible. So sit down every year and rethink your plan and drop the things that are no longer applicable and take advantage of the opportunity coming your way. I remember Peter Drucker saying to Bob Buford, when he got into his 60s, he said to him, Bob, you need to change how you lead. Now think about that. That's adaptability. Here was a 90-year-old telling a 60-year-old, you need to be adaptable. He said to him, Bob, you need to release and direct the energy of others and no longer supply the energy. He was teaching Bob that you move from warrior to king to sage in life, warrior to king to sage. And Bob was a CEO who needed to get into a sage role, bring wisdom, and undergird other people's, to be the platform, not the show, to no longer supply the energy, but release and direct the energy of others. And I've watched these older men and women that are great leaders deep into life, and they're more and more adaptable as they get older. And so what would it look like for you and I to think ahead in terms of the decades of our life, to think intentionally about finishing well and not just having a great start, and then know my calling, be surrounded with encouragement, and insist on reinventing, insist on adaptability, even when it's uncomfortable, with the goal that at the end of my life, I'm still making a contribution. I remember when Bob Buford threw a birthday party for Peter Drucker on his 90th birthday, he sent him a note saying, thank you for doing that. And he said, thank you for helping me make the last 11 years of my life the most productive. Can you imagine writing a young guy that you've been mentoring when you're 90 years old, thanking him for helping you adapt, be adaptable, so that the last 11 years of your life are the most productive? That is really inspiring to me. I want to finish life well. I want to slide into heaven, having given every bit of effort I can, first to Linda and our family, and then to those that I'm called to serve.